Every great teacher knows the importance of a well-planned lesson. A lesson plan is an important part of achieving a well-planned lesson. A lesson plan tells the teacher how to teach a particular objective. While formal lesson plans are typed and printed on paper, you can have informal lesson plans that you plan out in your head or on any piece of paper that you have. A lesson plan provides the structure that is needed for students to learn at their best. It ensures that classes have an introduction, a middle where the learning happens, and an end where the newly learned ideas are reviewed. And lesson planning makes it that much easier to teach a class, because you, as the teacher, will know exactly what to do and when. In this lesson, we'll talk about lesson plans and how important it is to write effective ones that include assessments. An assessment is a test for understanding. As a student, you know the formal assessments that are given as tests. Your grade from the test determines how much you've learned. While this is the most well-known way of giving assessments, you as the teacher now actually have more types of assessments that you can use while teaching. You don't have to wait until the end to determine whether your students are learning what you want them to learn. A great teacher knows how to use assessments to determine whether the students are making the right connections as the lesson is progressing. And a great teacher will also use the information from her assessments to make immediate changes to the lesson so that her students gain a complete understanding of the objective. All of this is included in the lesson plan. There is no limit to the number of assessments to be included in a lesson. Use as many as needed to make sure your students are learning as they should. For example, during the lesson, you can ask questions to assess your students' learning. By asking questions throughout your lesson, you will know whether your students understand the material in the way that you want them to or not. You can also have students do a project so that you can see if they understand the new information enough to use it properly for their projects. If you notice that some of your students are not giving you correct answers, then you can redirect by teaching a mini lesson to help them understand the areas they're having trouble with. All this can and should be included in your lesson planning. With the right type of assessment during your lesson, you'll be able to keep your students on track with their learning. When the lesson is over, then you will need to give an assessment that tells you if your lesson was successful or not. This usually includes a test or a project where your students are fully in charge. You will not be guiding your students as you did during the lesson. This final assessment after the lesson provides your students an opportunity to show how much of the lesson they have absorbed and how well they understand the new information. You will use this assessment as a means to measure the success of your lesson plan and to see if you need to reteach the lesson. If students perform poorly, perhaps the lesson plan needs to be redesigned so that more students are engaged and learning throughout. If the students perform well, then the lesson plan has achieved its purpose and taught the necessary objective. Let's review what you've learned about lesson plans and assessments. A lesson plan tells the teacher how to teach a particular objective. An assessment is a test for understanding. As a teacher, you will need to include assessments in your lesson plan not only at the end, but also during the lesson. By testing for understanding during the lesson, you will know if your students are making the right connections as you are teaching. If students are not making the right connections, you'll need to redirect them so that they do. Assessments given during a lesson can include questions or projects. At the end of the lesson, you will need to test to see if your students have learned the objective of the lesson. The assessment given at the end of a lesson is typically a test, but it can also be an essay or a project where the students perform on their own without any guidance from the teacher. How students perform on this assessment tells you how successful your lesson was and if the lesson needs to be redesigned.